Hey folks, Ken Poole here with Engel and Volkers Barrie. Just going to run you through a quick update of where we are in the market. I'm going to give you a really quick recap of what happened all throughout 2021 and how we've gotten to where we are right now, which is in an extreme seller's market. Um, So these numbers are generated by yours truly. So some of this stuff you're not going to see anywhere else. If you have any questions about it, please reach out to me anytime. Easiest way for some of you is to just reply to an email if you got this in an email. If not, you can also contact me directly at 705 309 0785. Shoot me a text, say, hey, what's up with X, Y, or Z? I'll be glad to get back to you. Anyhow, let's get moving here. So, what you see on the screen in front of you is a table that shows number of new listings. Okay, so you can see that all down here. Okay, that's kind of messy, but that's all right. And then we got cancellations over on this side. All right, so the cancellations, you'll see there's percentages beside it. That kind of gives us a feel for how many listings were canceled that week in comparison to how many were listed. Often a big portion of the new listing, the majority of the cancellations end up being put back into the listings pool because a lot of the time that's a strategy. Something doesn't work the way you want it to, so you cancel it and you relist it. Now, one of the things that happens in markets like this, people do holding offer dates. When those holding offer dates start to backfire, or if they don't work out, the agent will usually cancel the listing and relist it at a new price or the price they're looking for. So I was using cancellations to just kind of keep a measure on how the market was responding to the offer dates. So if you look, this portion of the tables kicks off the start of February. You can see that the number of new listings, as we kind of go down the dates here, was really flying upwards. It kind of peaked here in early March at 409 new listings. Now again, this is in all of Simcoe County, 409 new listings that week. And we can see that generally speaking, the cancellation percentages were kind of usually between 10 and 15%, roughly anyhow. So as we kind of move along, you'll see here that as you start getting into April, May, things start to change as we get towards the end of May. Right now, first of all, that peak in the number of new listings per week had already started to slow down a little bit, and now we're kind of sticking in the 300s, right? All throughout here, you're all in the 300s. And the number of new listings percentage here, that's just as compared to the week before. So it was kind of dropping a little bit there, kind of got a little bit of a boost at the start of May and then kind of weakened again. But what we start to see here is that the cancellations are starting to creep up, and especially as we get towards the late May and into June, July. Okay, we're seeing like here, the end of June, the start of July, 28%. So that means there was a lot of offer dates that didn't go as expected, listings canceled, relisted. We were starting to see a little bit more of a saturation in the market in terms of inventory. And we'll see some tables that support that a little further down the line. But if you're just looking at nothing else, look at the number of cancellations and the percentages there, okay? All right, so as we continue forward, you get through the summer months, and the cancellation issues are kind of running strong through to about mid-August. And then, if you see what I've got written here, the first time the cancellation percentage went below 16% since April, and that was mid-August and early September. Even those ones that were red here, I put red if they were 20% or higher, were just around that 20% mark. So we were starting to the market was starting to strengthen up again from a seller's perspective, as we hit the fall. Okay, and you notice too that the number of new listings were kind of dropping until we kind of got a little bit of a surge right in here. Now, if you want to see what that coincides with, that's when school started again, right? So kids are back in school and people feel comfortable listing their homes again because they can get people through there without the chaos going on around home. As well, people came back from summer vacation because this past summer we could actually do things for the first time in a while. So what we see here through the fall months, you're going to notice is it's very strong from a seller's perspective, but you can't really necessarily tell it looking at these tables. You'll see that the number of new listings is really dropping as you go down in the dates here. Like we get into December, look at these weekly numbers. Now this is not abnormal for this time of year, right? We're looking at the Christmas, New Year's season. So the number of new listings is usually quite low in there. And, these are not fair numbers to use because the number of new listings was so low. And as we're getting towards the end of the year here, there's a bunch of like weak listings that have been sitting around for a while and they're finally getting canceled. So those percentages aren't necessarily great to look at. You'll notice here though that the cancellations, I think the percentages are a little bit higher in here only because the number of new listings coming on each week was a little bit lower. So you will notice though as we got into this new year of 2022, look at how low this cancellation percentage has gone, and it's looking a lot like January of last year. So if we move on to some different tables, this table shows number of new listings versus how many were sold that week. Okay, so and along the right hand side you're going to see the sold to new list percentage down here. Okay, so that is just telling us so for instance this first line here, okay, 80%, that's 230 out of 286 is approximately 80%. So I'm using that as a ratio to just kind of figure out how strong is the market from a seller's perspective, how much inventory is getting gobbled up in comparison to how many were mouse battery very low. Oh, my mouse needs to be recharged. Okay, well, anyways. Sorry for the distraction. So if you look at these numbers along here, if it's green, that means there's a high percentage of the inventory getting gobbled up in comparison to how much came on that week. If it's black, it's between 70 and 80%, and if it's red, it's lower than 70%. In other words, we should have some inventory growth going on those weeks where it's red, because not as much was getting gobbled up as much as stuff was coming onto the market. All right, so if we look at February through March, April again, number of new listings per week are exploding. We do see that the solds per week are increasing as well, but then we get a couple little blips in here into May. Into May is when we start seeing some cracks in the numbers of people buying up stuff. So that's kind of you've got a really strong spring though cruising through there. We see a lot of green and black, only 2 reds here up until we get into May. So just something to think about for this year. I'll explain more as we continue to move on. So as I'd mentioned before, looking at May, we can see again the number of new listings. It starts dropping downwards as we move on through the year once we get to the end of May. And you can notice in here we get a big chunk of black with no green, and then followed by a red, and then we get one little green in here. But through May and pretty much June, the number of new listings are in comparison to number of solds are consistently well above. Okay, so that means we're adding inventory in, which gives buyers more options, which gives sellers less leverage, right? So helping to balance the market a little bit. If we move into the end of the summer though, and kind of look at what's going on now, the new listings are dropping here as we go down. Now the solds, they're kind of holding relatively stable, like they're bouncing around but kind of staying within the same range, all in here, except for this one spot that it dropped down a little bit. That was the first time the number of solds for a week went below 150 since January. And you'll notice now we start seeing a whole bunch of greens. So we get a couple greens here, we get a couple reds, then we get a few greens here, and look at, we get 94 and 93%. Those are pretty high numbers in comparison to how many were coming on the board. Then we'll go red, black, and then it's just like green nonstop after this. Okay, so again, remember, green means a high percentage of sales as compared to how many listings came on that week, right? So if I take you to, here we were, start of September. So start of September, 82%, all green. Now let's look at what happens next. Green, and some crazy numbers here, right? So this is where the inventory really started to disappear. It was already low because we had a string of stuff getting gobbled up, but look at these numbers. Like, this is the first time it went 100%. So new listings sold that week 100%. That's not even accounting for listings that were expired or canceled. So we're losing tons of inventory that week, right? 136%, 200%. As we were going through these weeks where nobody wants to list, normally activity is slowing right down through this chunk of time, getting a ton of sales in comparison. So, that's partly why we lost even more inventory during that time. In other words, there's a lot of buyers that have been backed up throughout this past year that are still watching, waiting for their opportunity to get something. Get into the new year, we started seeing some inventory start to jump on right away, which isn't always usual for the first week of January. And so we're kind of into a more healthy range here, but I don't expect that will remain for long. Now, if we look at the next table here, I'm going to take you through a couple things. We don't have to look at everything because I know there's a lot of stuff going on. So I will kind of guide you through this and give you the key things to look at. So this table, again, weeks of the year, this February, this is starting in 2021. And this is actually the whole month of February up at the top here. Kind of, see if I can, markering over myself. Let's just move my head out of the way a little bit here. Okay, so if you look here, starting the first week of March, number of new listings that came on the board, we've seen those numbers before. Here's how many were canceled or expired that week. Okay, not super important for this table, but this number, how many were taken off the board that week. Okay, so the first week of March, 348 new listings. 332 came off the board. That's how many were sold, canceled, or expired. So in other words, we gained 16 total listings in net were added into the inventory pool that week. Okay? Now this number here, I've got a lot of stuff going on here. This number here, this last column, this is cumulative net since January 18th. I just started tracking these numbers January 18th, 2021. So we were already really low in inventory at that time. So believe it or not, from January 18th to the end of February, we had actually gained 218 listings onto the board in net inventory growth. And so as you can see here through this table, as we move on, generally speaking, there's a couple spots where we pulled backwards a little bit, but generally speaking, we were gaining inventory right up through to mid-April. We saw a little pullback in late April, early May, and then we were gaining more inventory. Okay, you can see here, like right at the end of late May, we were 465 listings higher in inventory across Simcoe County than we were on January 18th. Okay, so that's a substantial difference. And as we get into, there's some overlap here, right? So just if you look back here, I marked this in blue. Now this table ends the week of May 17th. So that picks up right here, right? Okay, so this is where we were. The inventory still generally is growing through here, and it peaks right here. Okay, it peaks late June. Late June, we've hit like our maximum inventory spot, right? So we kind of had that spring surge. We're kind of getting to summertime. Inventory has been growing and growing and growing. And again, remember, hey, and look at the cancellations and expireds here, right? Like as we're getting into that time of year, they're kind of peaking as well. So as you can imagine from a buyer, that's about as ideal as the conditions got last year. And if we look after that though, you'll notice what's going on here. Like, okay, remember the green means we gained inventory as you're going down here. So look at how much was green before that. And then we get past that peak and into late July, and then it's just like, look at all this as we go on down here. It's almost all red. We're just losing inventory, losing inventory, losing inventory. And as we're losing inventory, look at the cumulative net growth on the board. It's dropping, right? As we go from mid to late July all the way down into October. This 1 week we saw a little blip here. That's that first week that the kids were back at school, and we saw an explosion of listings hit the board. Okay, but generally you can see the pattern here. Now look at these numbers. Now as we get through late July and into mid-August, we saw some big drops off of inventory. It's because less people were listing, and lots of sales and cancellations and expireds all happening at the same time. We continue to move on into mid-October and forwards. Look how crazy these drops in inventory get. Okay, the number of new listings are dropping because we're getting into the later part of the year. The weather's turning nasty, but the things coming off the board are still high. The cancellation expired numbers are not crazy, but the number of people buying up stuff is. Remember, I showed you that table with the percentage of sales versus new listings, right? So all of that just decimated our inventory. Meanwhile, look at this stuff. Look at these numbers. At this point, by the time we hit December, we were actually at less listings on the board than we were in mid-January of last year when everybody said we had no inventory. And we hit our lowest low right at the end of the year. 217 listings lower than we were in January of the year before. And here, let me clear that stuff off. This number down here, this minus 179, that's right around January 16th. Now keep in mind, I started tracking January 18th of 2021. So, if you're looking at it that way, oh no, let me get rid of this. Essentially, we're 179 listings less on the board than we were same time last year. So not great for buyers. good for sellers, not much competition, right? And if you're out there in the market, you're feeling that. For my visual learners, here we are, net inventory, okay? So starting back January 18th last year, okay, 0 is just, that's ground zero from where I started. And you can see here as we got into that summer time, right? Like it was peaking right in around here, right? Mid to late June. And then by the time we get to middle of July, it's just heading down, right? And the important thing for us to be looking at right now based on time of year is, look at this, right as you get towards the end of January, it's like straight up till right in around mid-March. So this is earlier than people think in terms of timing wise, right? The real opportunity is late January to mid-March. A lot of people think, oh, I got to go on at the spring market right in, mid-March to June. Well, that's this area here, and that's when it was starting to weaken. So I would argue, if you're looking at timing for listing, it's an ideal. But again, you got to buy and sell in the same market. So that's something else, and that's a conversation to have with whomever the real estate professional is that you're talking with. Okay. If you're not speaking with somebody and you want to have a conversation about that, feel free to contact me anytime. This just gives us a visual of what was going on in terms of new listings versus how many were taken off the board. So you can see that once we got into the end of January, the number of new listings coming on was consistently higher than the number of listings coming off, right? So anytime there's a gap here, you can see this gap in between. If the green is above the pink, that means that we're gaining inventory, right? And then it kind of wobbles back and forth, but generally speaking, a lot of the time the green was above the pink right until kind of around the big switchover happened in that middle of middle of June. And then as we move on here, all through this area here, you can see most of the time the pink is above the green, meaning the inventory is getting chewed up. Okay, so that's again another visual. And we may very well see the exact same patterns, not in the exact same positions, but generally speaking, this year. Then we want to talk about price quickly. Okay, so this table, I've blocked them into 2-week chunks just to get a bigger pool of data for every time. So you can see for this 2-week block here, for instance, 284 were sold during those 2 weeks. This is the sale price versus original list price. So yes, as most of you have seen, unless you're living under a rock, the sale price is almost always above the asking price. A lot of that's due to games that are going on in the market. People aren't actually asking what they want. They're asking a lower price and using bidding wars and things like that. So by looking at the sale price versus the original list price, you can get an idea of how often and how extreme the holding offer date method is being used and how effectively it's working. So last year it kind of peaked out in that mid to late February. Generally speaking, over 11% of asking was happening. And you look here as you kind of went through the rest of March and into April, you can see it starting to drop, right? And you'll notice that it kind of hits it kind of bottoms out a little later on in the year. I'll take you through that in just a moment. But let's look at sale prices. So we kind of saw a relatively consistent chunk of pricing from mid-January through mid-March. And then we got a bump up in in April. Okay, and then once we got through April, then it bumped up again. Okay, bumped up to an average of 801. looking, average was around 751 in from January through to April. Then April was about almost 770, and then in from about May on to July, it was about 801 as an average. Okay. Then we saw a little bit of a pullback here, right in here. Pulls back a little bit by a couple percent. And this is right in around when that inventory had peaked. Okay. Also notice that in around this time, you're seeing that sale price to original list price is bottoming out, still on average above 100%, but it's kind of bottoming out because the inventory had peaked so much and people could feel a little bit of a weakening in the market, so they weren't going in as much of a frenzy, right? And a little bit healthier of conditions generally overall, and that was about the healthiest we saw the market, and I'm just talking from a balance between buyers and sellers. But then we got that little pullback, then it pushed back into that range that we had, a month before that, and then it continued to climb again. As the inventory tightened up, the prices were continuing to climb. Okay, so average price then jumps, by the time we're into mid-September, up to an average of around 811,000, and then by the time we're into mid-October, the average is up around 836,000. So you can kind of see how this stuff really accelerates, and it continued to accelerate upwards as the inventory got so tight. Remember, as we got towards late November, it was down to almost nothing again, and as we got towards the end of the year, down to almost no listings. So it jumps again up to an average of around 871,000. Now here's the crazy thing. I ran for the previous 2 weeks up to this past Sunday, and this number here is significantly higher than the 871. Now this is only 1 2-week block, so it could have a little bit of an outlier pull up to it, but it definitely feels in the market, and according to these numbers, looks like we saw another shot up as we got into the new year here, right? I put these apart, but this is just from January 2nd and then January 3rd and on to January 16th. So this 2-week block here is just my first full 2-week block in the new year. As we got into the new year, you felt a bit of a jump. So I don't know, it's not a full 11%, but there's definitely a jump upwards from even December prices from last year. So, that gives you kind of an idea of what's going on in the market. I know that's a lot of numbers and a lot of stuff going on there, but if you have any questions, you want to discuss any of this stuff, I love talking these numbers and discussing why and what forces are leading to this. Ultimately, as you can see here, inventory is a key driving force. Why are we at such a low inventory? That's a whole bunch of different factors we can discuss. But thanks so much for taking the time to watch this. And I hope you're all off to a great start to 2022. Take care and all the best.